I still remember the exact pitch of the silverware clinking when it happened. The ballroom was glowing that night, crystal chandeliers dripping gold, violins humming something expensive in the background. My family had rented out the entire top floor of the Wexford Hotel for Nathan's engagement dinner, a classy little affair, as my mother liked to call it. Everyone looked perfect. My brother was in his tailored tux, smiling like he owned the room. And for a few hours, I managed to forget how much he enjoyed reminding me that I didn't belong in his world. Until the waiter placed that plate in front of me. At first, I thought it was a mistake. A white porcelain dish, smaller than everyone else's, with bright orange chicken nuggets arranged in a circle and a little cup of ketchup in the middle, like a kid's meal from a drive-thru. A folded napkin beside it read in neat handwriting, "Evelyn Special." For a second, I actually froze. Then Nathan's voice rang out across the table, full of fake warmth. "Come on, Eve, don't be shy. We got you your favorite meal. You still like these, right?" The table erupted in laughter, polite at first, the kind people use when they're not sure if they're allowed to laugh. Then louder, once Nathan smirked and raised his glass, as if he had given permission. His fiancée giggled too, covering her mouth like she didn't want to, but she did. My face burned. I tried to smile, to brush it off, but my throat had locked itself shut. The waiter, clearly uncomfortable, stood frozen for a moment before walking away. Everyone around me had filet mignon, wine glasses sparkling, plates steaming. And there I was, staring at 6 chicken nuggets and a smiley face of ketchup. My mother leaned toward my father and whispered something behind her napkin. He didn't even look up from his phone. They were both used to Nathan's games. He was the golden son, the heir to the cross name, the one they called charming. I was the quiet one, the afterthought. I stabbed one of the nuggets just to have something to do with my hands. My fingers trembled slightly as I brought it to my mouth. It tasted like cardboard and humiliation. Someone across the table whispered, "That's actually kind of funny," and a few others chuckled again. Nathan clapped his hands together. "You know, she used to throw tantrums if her food wasn't cut into little pieces. I figured I'd save the chef the trouble tonight." The laughter came easier now. It rolled through the room like a wave I couldn't stop. My stomach twisted. My nails dug into my palm under the table. I wanted to say something, anything, but my words had always been the first thing he took from me. Since childhood, Nathan had a way of turning every weakness into a stage. I looked at him, smiling so wide it hurt. His eyes flicked to mine, cold, assessing, satisfied. Like a cat watching its prey twitch. He knew exactly what he'd done. He'd orchestrated this moment down to the last detail, and he was feeding off the attention. When the laughter finally faded, all that was left was the faint sound of cutlery and a violin struggling to fill the silence. I sat there quietly, every second stretching like a lifetime. In that moment, I realized he wasn't just humiliating me for fun. He was performing. He wanted people to remember that I was small. That I didn't belong. I forced myself to swallow another bite, keeping my eyes on my plate, pretending not to notice the phone cameras discreetly aimed my way. It wasn't the first time Nathan had turned me into a spectacle, but it was the first time I didn't fight it. Because this time, I wanted him to believe he'd won. I smiled at him then, small, slow, calculated. He raised an eyebrow, clearly pleased with himself. He didn't know that the only performance that mattered hadn't even begun. While they laughed at my plate, they had no idea what I had already recorded. For most of my life I have existed quietly inside a family that only celebrated noise when it came from Nathan. I was the daughter who learned early that staying agreeable kept the peace, that being useful mattered more than being seen. I handled schedules, answered emails, smoothed tensions before they reached my parents' ears. When guests praised our family, I stood slightly behind them, smiling, invisible but necessary, like furniture that matched the room. Respect mattered to me because I never received it by default. I earned it in fragments. A nod from my father when I solved a problem before it became expensive. A tight smile from my mother when I dressed correctly, spoke carefully, didn't embarrass the name. I wasn't asking to be adored. I just wanted to be treated like an adult who belonged at the table. That kid's meal wasn't about food. It was a message. It said I was still a child in their eyes, someone to be laughed at, not taken seriously. It stripped years of quiet effort down to a punchline and served it warm. Nathan knew that. He knew exactly what it symbolized, which was why he chose it. This wasn't new behavior. Nathan had been rehearsing this role since we were young. He corrected my stories mid-sentence, exaggerated my mistakes, shared private moments as jokes. At family dinners he'd interrupt me, laugh, then finish my thought wrong on purpose. People laughed because he made it sound harmless. I learned to stop talking. The imbalance grew with time. He rose, celebrated, protected. I adapted, adjusted, absorbed. Every smile I forced taught him there were no consequences. By the time that plate touched the table, he wasn't just humiliating me. He was confirming a dynamic everyone had already accepted, including me, until that night. I told myself I was being mature by staying quiet, that silence was strength. But silence also trained them how to treat me. Nathan learned he could push further each time, that my discomfort was entertainment without risk. My parents learned they didn't need to intervene because I never demanded they do. That pattern calcified until it felt permanent. I carried that weight everywhere. At work, I overprepared. In relationships, I apologized first. At home, I shrank. Respect wasn't just emotional for me, it was survival. Without it, I felt like I was dissolving, like my presence could be erased with a joke and a smile. So when that plate appeared, it collapsed years into one moment. Every interruption. Every laugh at my expense. Every time I was told Nathan was just joking. The room didn't see history. They saw a gag. I saw proof of exactly where I stood, and how low I had been trained to accept. That realization hurt more than the laughter. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, heavy, and final, like something locking into place inside my chest. I understood then that the pain came from recognition, not surprise. I had been here before. I just never allowed myself to name it until that night. Naming it changed something. It meant I could no longer pretend it was harmless, accidental, or earned. Once named, it demanded an answer. I was done pretending now. In our family, roles were assigned early and never questioned. Nathan was the golden child, the one whose confidence was mistaken for leadership, whose cruelty was softened into charisma. I was the other one. The flexible one. The one blamed when tension appeared, even if I hadn't spoken. At holidays, people asked Nathan about his plans, his future, his opinions. When they turned to me, it was usually to comment on my quietness, as if silence were a flaw I needed to outgrow. Nathan learned quickly how much space he was allowed to take. He filled rooms with stories that always ended with me as the punchline. If I objected, he'd laugh and say, "Relax, it's a joke," and everyone would nod, relieved they didn't have to choose sides. Jokes were his camouflage. They allowed him to say anything without consequence, and if I reacted, I became the problem. Sensitive. Dramatic. Difficult. My father perfected the art of absence without leaving the room. When Nathan embarrassed me, Dad would lower his eyes, adjust his cuff, check his phone. His silence was not neutral. It was permission. He believed confrontation was messier than cruelty, and he valued calm appearances over quiet damage. I learned that looking to him for protection was a waste of breath. My mother's approval was colder, sharper. She never laughed outright, but her lips would curve just enough to show agreement. Sometimes she'd add a comment, something subtle, like, "Nathan has such a sense of humor," or, "You know how Evelyn is." That was her way of sealing it. Humor endorsed. Target confirmed. Nathan needed witnesses. His dominance meant nothing if it wasn't seen. He preferred public settings, dinners, celebrations, anywhere laughter could be recruited as backup. Embarrassing me privately didn't interest him. He wanted the social proof. He wanted people to see me diminished and accept it as entertainment. That acceptance fed him. It steadied him. I used to believe enduring it made me stronger. That restraint was dignity. But over time, I noticed how he watched reactions more than faces. He studied the room after every jab, measuring how far he could go next. Each success emboldened him. Each silence trained him. What he didn't notice was when I stopped shrinking. When I started observing instead of absorbing. When my phone stayed face down but recording, when my memory sharpened, when I began saving texts, clips, moments. I learned from him, quietly. Control didn't require volume. It required patience. Nathan didn't stop after the plate. He leaned back in his chair, one arm draped casually over the back, watching the room like a host satisfied with his opening act. Every laugh, every glance in my direction fed him. I could see it in the way his jaw relaxed, the way his shoulders loosened, like he'd settled into himself. This was his element. Control disguised as charm. I started noticing everything. The woman across from me pretending not to stare but failing. The couple to my left whispering behind their wine glasses. Phones lifted just a little too high, screens glowing briefly before dipping back down. Someone was recording. Maybe more than one. My hands stayed folded in my lap, my posture straight, my expression neutral. Inside, my thoughts were loud, sharp, cataloging every detail like evidence. Nathan excused himself halfway through dinner and tapped my shoulder lightly as he passed. "Come with me," he said under his breath, smiling like he was doing me a favor. I followed him down the side corridor near the restrooms, heels clicking softly against the marble floor. The music faded there, replaced by muffled laughter and clinking glasses. He turned to face me, arms crossed. "You took that pretty well," he said. "I was worried you'd make a scene." His eyes scanned my face, searching for cracks. "Guess you finally learned your place." I told him quietly that it wasn't funny. The words felt small the moment they left my mouth. He laughed, a short, sharp sound. "God, Evelyn, you always do this. Lighten up. People loved it." He leaned in slightly. "You don't want to be that sister, do you? The one who ruins things." When we returned to the table, my mother asked where we'd gone. Before I could answer, Nathan said, "She needed a moment. Got overwhelmed." My mother nodded once, cool and efficient. "You're too sensitive," she told me softly, like it was advice. My father didn't look up. The cruelty sharpened after that. Nathan made comments just loud enough to carry, jokes layered with meaning only I understood. Each one landed heavier than the last. I felt the pressure building, the room closing in, but I didn't react. I watched. I listened. I let it happen. By the end of the night, Nathan looked triumphant. He believed the story was finished. Sitting there, surrounded by people who thought they'd seen everything, I made a quiet decision to let the night continue exactly as planned. I didn't start recording because I wanted revenge. I started because I needed proof that what was happening was real. Years ago, after one of Nathan's jokes left me shaking in a restaurant bathroom, I opened the voice memo app on my phone and forgot to turn it off. His voice filled the recording later, laughing, explaining to a friend how easy it was to keep Evelyn small. Hearing it back made my chest hurt, but it also anchored me. I wasn't imagining it. After that, it became a habit I never talked about. Videos recorded from my lap at family dinners, the camera tilted just enough to catch his face and the way his smile sharpened when eyes were on me. Audio clips from car rides where he dropped the charm and spoke freely, calling me embarrassing, childish, dead weight. Screenshots of texts he sent late at night, mocking me for being quiet, then deleting them the next morning like nothing had happened. Collecting it was exhausting. Every time I pressed record, I felt like I was betraying the version of myself that still hoped he'd change. There were nights I cried afterward, sitting alone at my kitchen table, phone face down beside a cold plate of food I couldn't finish. Silence became part of the ritual. I learned to sit with it, to let it stretch, to let him fill it with his own words. Nathan never suspected anything. He thought I was passive. Predictable. That belief made him careless. He performed cruelty the way some people perform confidence, assuming the audience would always applaud. He didn't notice when I stopped defending myself. He didn't notice how often I was watching instead of reacting. Food kept appearing in the recordings. Plates pushed toward me. Jokes about portions, about appetite, about how much space I was allowed to take. Tables where everyone else leaned in toward him while I sat straight-backed, hands folded, absorbing it all. Watching it later was surreal. I could see the pattern clearly then. The control. The repetition. The way he needed me diminished to feel secure. The hardest part wasn't the humiliation. It was staying quiet long enough to let him expose himself fully. There were moments I wanted to scream, to flip a table, to end it. Instead, I breathed, counted seconds, and pressed record again. Each clip felt like a small betrayal of my own pain, but also like a step toward something solid. By the time that event night arrived, the proof already existed. Hours of it. Years of it. Sitting there with that child's plate in front of me, I wasn't just watching Nathan. I was watching a story reach its final chapter, one he thought he was writing alone. The night I decided to turn the recordings into something tangible, I sat cross-legged on my bedroom floor, laptop balanced on my knees, headphones tight over my ears. My hands didn't shake. I had gone numb by that point. Years of laughter at my expense had dulled the edges of anger, leaving something colder, sharper. Focus. Patience. The files were there, all of them, videos, audio clips, screenshots, texts. Every moment Nathan had ever exposed himself, every smirk, every sentence meant to diminish me, was saved. I started with the event night. The clip of him sliding the children's meal across the table, lifting his glass, eyes scanning the room as if to measure applause. Then I layered in audio from another dinner years ago, him explaining in a low, smug voice to a cousin how easy it was to control me with a look or a laugh. Screenshots of his texts appeared between the clips, each message dripping with entitlement. Evelyn overreacting again. She still thinks she's part of this. The editing process was meticulous. I didn't rush it. I cut the awkward laughter of the crowd alongside my father's silence, my mother's tight-lipped nods, everything that proved their complicity. Pauses were crucial, moments where the room went quiet, where faces turned, where I could feel the weight of everyone watching. Those gaps made the video breathe, made it real. I slowed some clips, sped others, highlighting his expressions, the tiny tilt of the jaw, the smug glimmer in his eye. Every smirk became evidence. I included his voice from years past, too. Clear, unguarded, unaware he was being documented. "She's so predictable," he said once while we were at a family brunch. Another time, "Everyone laughs at her, and she still thinks it's okay to speak." His confidence, his mockery, all captured perfectly. The footage of my parents followed, his audience, his silent cheerleaders. My father scrolling his phone while Nathan performed. My mother leaning just slightly forward, lips curved like she endorsed the spectacle. All of them, unknowingly complicit, now preserved in high resolution. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't even smile. My face was flat, expressionless. The numbness had set in long ago, the part of me that once flinched at humiliation replaced with a sharp, calculated calm. I arranged the clips in sequence, beginning with small jabs, moving through public dinners, private car rides, texts, culminating with the kids' meal. The crescendo. The moment when Nathan had assumed ultimate control, and everyone had bought it. Every edit was deliberate. I cut some laughter short to emphasize discomfort. I held lingering frames on his expressions, the way his eyes searched mine for a reaction. I left spaces for the sound of my hands resting on the table, quiet but tense. The video didn't just show him. It showed the environment he had built around himself, how the power dynamic played out, how I had endured. And all the while, Nathan remained unaware. He leaned back, smiled at the crowd, whispered small taunts to me under the table, still confident, still mocking. He had no idea that every word, every gesture, every patronizing glance had been documented. He had built his stage, and now, unknowingly, I had recorded the entire performance. By the time the final frame appeared on my screen, showing the tiny plate and the smirk he wore as guests laughed, I leaned back and exhaled. The work was complete. Every humiliation, every subtle cruelty, every silent endorsement captured. My revenge wasn't shouting, it wasn't confrontation. It was evidence, cold and precise, ready to speak louder than I ever could. The moment arrived sooner than anyone expected. Nathan was still basking in the afterglow of his performance, surrounded by laughter and clinking glasses. I waited until the end of the formal speeches, when everyone's attention had begun to drift, plates pushed back, wine glasses refilled. Quietly, I connected my laptop to the projector hidden behind a potted plant, volume low at first, just enough for me to hear over the last murmurs. When the first clip played, the room leaned forward without realizing it. Nathan glanced at me, his smile faltering just slightly, confusion registering in his eyes. I kept my expression neutral. He had spent decades assuming I would never act, and this hesitation was new to him. The audio of his smug explanations, his laughter, his private taunts, filled the ballroom. Every word he had said about controlling me, belittling me, mocking me for years was now undeniably public. Phones appeared slowly at first, then in a wave. Guests lifted their devices, some recording, some trying to catch a glimpse of the screen from across the room. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Laughter died quickly, replaced by the hum of recognition and disbelief. The projected clips moved from the kids' meal to earlier dinners, the car rides, the texts, the subtle manipulations. Each transition tightened the room, as if the walls themselves were closing in. Nathan's eyes darted to the projector, then to the crowd, realization dawning. His mouth opened to speak, to reclaim control, but no words came. The confidence that had carried him through decades of subtle cruelty cracked under the weight of the undeniable evidence. His posture, once arrogant, now slumped imperceptibly as the audience processed the full scope of his behavior. I saw my parents then. My father frozen mid-toast, glass halfway to his lips, expression unreadable but undeniably shaken. My mother's hand tightened around her napkin, lips pressed in a thin line, eyes wide. Both of them were silent, incapable of intervention, unable to justify the patterns that had been laid bare before dozens of witnesses. Their inaction, their quiet endorsements, all exposed. The silence was heavy, suffocating. It stretched across the room like a physical presence. Guests whispered to each other, heads turning toward Nathan, phones waving slightly in midair, capturing every frame. People who had once smiled politely at his jokes now frowned, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Reputation, carefully curated for years, began to crumble visibly, like a building with its foundation removed piece by piece. Nathan's lips twitched. He tried again, a short laugh, a cough, a hand gesture to break the tension, but it was too late. The rhythm of control had shifted, and every eye that once followed him now followed the screen, absorbing evidence that could not be denied. He was no longer the golden child. The performance had ended, and the audience saw the truth. I sat back in my chair, numb and detached, watching the unraveling with the same quiet attention I had given him for years. The hum of whispered astonishment, the occasional gasp, the subtle shaking of heads, it all confirmed what I already knew. For once, I was not the one under scrutiny. I had orchestrated the revelation, and now Nathan, the charming manipulator, stood exposed before everyone who mattered. In that moment, the room was mine, not with noise, but with truth. And the silence, heavy and complete, spoke louder than anything I could have said aloud. After the video ended, the room stayed frozen. I stood, letting my heels click softly against the marble floor as I approached Nathan. Every eye followed us, but I felt nothing. Numbness had become armor. He turned slowly, realization hardening into fear. The smirk was gone. His usual composure cracked at the corners, a tremor in his jaw betraying the first hint of panic. "Evelyn," he began, voice low, uncertain. Words that usually carried mockery sounded weak, hollow. "You don't get to speak first," I said calmly, stopping just a foot away. My voice carried across the hall, clear, steady, controlled. The silence thickened, heavier than any shouting, pressing against every wall, every chandelier, every eye in the room. Guests leaned forward, sensing the gravity of the moment, hands twitching, eyes darting, looking for escape, for an ally, for anything to regain the confidence he had lost. But there was none. My parents were frozen, shoulders stiff, mouths tight. My father's phone was forgotten on the table. My mother's napkin lay limp in her hand. No words, no excuses, no shields. Their silence only amplified the shift that had begun. I took a breath, letting it fill the space between us. For years, you've controlled every room you enter, every conversation, every glance. You thought your power came from charm, from jokes, from making me small. You thought silence meant submission. But it doesn't. Nathan's eyes widened. His lips parted, but no sound emerged. The energy had shifted entirely. For the first time, he was uncertain, unarmed. I continued, each word deliberate, each syllable carrying every humiliation I had endured, every betrayal I had recorded, every moment I had absorbed silently. "Your stage is over," I said. "And everyone has seen it. Not through my anger, not through screaming, but through truth. Every gesture, every word, every look you used to dominate me is now undeniable. And I won't shrink anymore." He slumped slightly, chest tightening, a flicker of desperation in his eyes. The golden child was no longer golden. Power had shifted, silently but completely, in the span of one moment. The room's quiet confirmed it. Every witness understood what had changed without a single shout. I looked at him, steady, unwavering, the years of subjugation replaced by calm authority. "This ends tonight," I said softly, final, irrevocable. And for the first time in our lives, Nathan Cross, the one who had always orchestrated my humiliation, had nowhere left to hide. I turned away from Nathan, letting my heels echo softly across the marble floor. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. There was nothing left for me to argue, nothing left to demand. Every word, every gesture, every proof had spoken for me. I didn't beg, I didn't plead. I simply walked, step by step, through the quiet hall, past stunned guests, past frozen parents, past the remnants of the life I had known. The weight I had carried for years, the invisible pressure to be small, the constant calculation to avoid his wrath, the endless rehearsals of silence, began to lift. Each step was a reclamation, a tangible piece of self-worth returning to me. I realized that dignity isn't given. It isn't earned through approval or compliance. It is taken quietly, decisively, in moments when the world expects you to shrink. And tonight, I had taken it fully. Outside, the night air was cool and indifferent. I breathed it in, letting it fill the hollows that had been carved by years of subtle cruelty. For the first time, the silence around me wasn't suffocating, it was liberating. The soft hum of the city, distant sirens, the muted chatter of taxis and late-night pedestrians, became the soundtrack to my new beginning. I didn't need applause. I didn't need validation. The clarity of my own gaze, the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat, was enough. Everything that had diminished me before, the ridicule, the performances, the laughter at my expense, now only reminded me of how far I had come. I carried my dignity like a shield, invisible to them but absolute to me. And as I stepped into the darkened street, leaving the lights and the grandeur behind, I understood something essential. True power is not in breaking others, nor in proving oneself to them. It is in walking away quietly, fully aware that your value does not depend on their recognition. The city around me was indifferent, the night vast, and I felt, at last, profoundly complete. My silence had spoken louder than any confrontation, and my dignity, once buried, now shone in every measured step I took. And in that quiet, I realized I was finally free.